Okay, today's Artho Economics Foundation and Public Service Announcements, Chapter 5, Part 4. Enforcing the Economics of Self-Defense Against Corruption by practicing quitam law and buying into champerty law, running the numbers to cash in on the checks and balances. Pulling numbers out of the air versus running the numbers to appease judges' rights to rule in favor of government treasuries, those who seek justice, and the victims. In reference to the numbers on Chapter 5, Part 3, plus judicially satisfying the amounts for the following: government documented amounts of damages, direct confiscation that is still due. Government rule of law of funding, fines, retribution as the amounts of penalties owed as more perjuries, punitive damages that are still owed. Plus the usual damage of character inflicted by the usual felon accomplices bearing false witness against the victim, amounts that are still owed. Quitam self-defense split. Government treasuries, 70%, victims, 30%. County and state applicable counts. In other words, counts that you can prosecute in a county or a state level, not a federal. Prosecution's collections as the poetic justice stimulates county and states' economies as the fastest return of funding, fines, retribution to the tax-paying commoners and the victims. National applicable counts, prosecutions, collections as poetic justices, sealed filings allow the county and state 60 days to prosecute and collect theirs in the first place before you go to the federal court. Then this stimulates the nation's economies by slowly returning funding, fines, retributions back into the jurisdictions of the original tax-paying commoners and victims. Then you go to the international applicable counts, prosecutions, collections as poetic justice. Stimulates the international import-export trading economies via the funding, fines, and retribution that eventually returns to the original tax-paying commoners and the victims. Champerty laws, self-defense split. In economic good times, when government treasuries are full and governments feasibly govern, quitam can be put on hold, forcing victims' self-defense via champerty laws, splitting the council's buy-in versus the victims' government documentation proving beyond a shadow of a doubt. That has to be negotiated. To split the fraud and forensic accounting discoveries as the council's expenses versus the victim's expense, that has to be negotiated. The split of whistleblower and witness protection as the council's expense or the victim expense also needs to be negotiated. Or the court's landmark decisions as international new case law and ethic changes involving U.S. designated funding enforces happy state banks get out of jail free card used in arbitrations, mediations, grand juries, no bills, appeals, pardons, and paroles. In other words, if you're sitting in a jail, you're a fool not to use this case law as a get out of jail free card. Hello, Willie, you red-headed stranger. Corruption stays in the business of corrupting and collapsing international economies, forcing prison budget cuts, amnesty, clemency, and blanket pardons to cash flow. Because when the economy hits the fan, and it will, you can't afford to even keep your prisons running. As history repeats, and current events confirm, when any nation allow the absolute powerful's corruption to collapse economies, then the broke nations, politicians, begin their usual saber rattling, blaming it on everybody but themselves. Then the usual war's inhumanity inflicted by the same politicians' prior negative cash flow choices. Now they have to invade and inflict rapes, murders, and the stealing of assets from other nations to temporarily prop up their broke nation's economy. Of course, the cost of war, you have to keep invading more nations because the cost of war is it's just prohibited. It's just, oh Lord. Same thing over and over. After the usual war's inhumanity is over, from the ashes of war, international courts, peacetime accountability of corruption's like kind retribution as payment in kind. It happens over and over again. Instead of upholding the Constitution, upholding the rule of law, and upholding the Constitution's oaths of office and professions as an attorneys in the first place, you could have skipped all of the wars, all the painting and suffering, and of course, the usual starvation of women, children, and the elderly. Over and over again. FiledEvidence.com. The first 10 exhibits are Happy State Bank's directors and employees' hypocrisy as happy hypocrites. Now, y'all remember, Happy State books, non-negotiable, of how if people don't believe the way they do in their organized religion, we get rid of them. Fortunately, for all the illegal filings they did in exhibits 1 through 10, oh, thank God, there are fewer people than these happy hypocrites. And or the current like-kind illegal filings and recordings, similar to the ones of Happy State Banks in exhibits 1 through 10. This one's against a deceased, incapacitated, Alzheimer's, elderly patient. A case involving Randall County, Texas court being decided as we speak. While the current international IPO turns judicial obstacles into international marketing opportunities.